Eric Mansfield is a state senator, a minister, a veteran, and a surgeon. He wants to be your next lieutenant governor. We talk to him next on North Carolina Now.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Good evening, I'm Kelly McCullen. Thank you so much for watching this very special edition of North Carolina Now, where I am joined on the set by State Senator Eric Mansfield, veteran, minister, etc. Thank you for being on the show, sir.
Thank you for having me.
You're running for lieutenant governor, and that's what we're here to talk about. I've watched you on Facebook. I see what you're saying. It's a defining moment in this state's history. What's so defining about it?
Because it gives us an opportunity to pivot from where we are to something better. I believe that when you look at state government and the bickering and the acrimony between the two parties, I believe it's something that we can pivot away from and bring a consensus together and move our state forward. I think when you talk to people across the state and you listen to what they're saying, I think whether you're a Democrat or Republican, everyone's tired of us not doing our job, which is to come to Raleigh and work on the consensus of the people, not for our own political party's goals. And so I think this election will certainly define that. And I believe that the populists of North Carolina will stand up and say, listen, we don't really care if you're right or you're left. We care if you're right or wrong, and we want you to do what's right for our state. And that's what's right for you personally or what's right for your party, but what's right for the people of this state.
What is your problem with the way the culture is in the legislature? Because the last big pivot was in the Senate, where you serve currently, was just, what, a year or so ago in 2010. Before that, it was 100 and some odd years before the last pivot.
Sure.
Are you talking beyond party here? Or are you saying the 2010 election was that fundamental, you want to swing it back in 2012?
Well, no. Actually, I think the way we voted in 2010, I don't think people were necessarily mad at Democrats. I think people were mad at government. And so I think if we'd had Republican legislature, I think they would have been voted out, because I think there's a lot of people who believe that government has become dysfunctional, and they listen to more sound bites and they really try to make sound policy. And so I think people are tired of that. And so I don't care if they're Republicans, Democrats, or independent. If we as a government don't come together and put people first, I think they should come every 2 years and reelect new people until we finally figure it out and get it right.
So how would you, if elected lieutenant governor, make people less sick or even feel good about state legislature?
Well, I think, one of the great things about the office of lieutenant governor, and I think one of my first 2 years as being a state senator, is the ability to go in and see both sides of an argument and try to develop some consensus. I think there are quite a number of bills that we worked on together, particularly in the medical field, and said, look, I see the fiscal responsibility part of this, but I also see what this will do to patient care. Is there some middle ground that we can get to? And 9 out of 10 times we got there. Certainly there's some ideological debates that Republicans and Democrats will always have, but those are small. I think the overall majority of what we do, we should be able to come to a consensus. And I think the lieutenant governor's office should be expanded so that we can get down on the floor, not on the floor, but get down in the hallways, go to people's offices and say, look, is there a way we can bring both sides together? And so I think that's what I want to do.
How do you feel about the size and the influence of that bully pulpit of the lieutenant governor's office? Do you feel like it's being shortchanged a bit in this current climate?
I think the ability to advocate for what's right. I think that can almost take on its own life. And I think if you have a lieutenant governor who goes out and talks to the people, I still believe that the government is fundamentally run by people, that the values that we believe in are not set by the government, but they're set by the people of this state. And I believe if you go out and start talking to people and really getting people excited about moving their government in the direction they want it to go, it'll move. And I think that's really what my role will be, not only just to stay inside the Senate, but to go across this state advocating for the things that we as North Carolinians believe in, and then pushing the General Assembly in that direction.
Now, the 2010 elections, you don't think that was a push in any particular direction for the General Assembly?
I think it was two things. One, I still think people were angry. I think they were upset because government is dysfunctional. But I also hear now that, hey, what we voted them to do, they're not doing. And the overwhelming thing that they asked us to do, to go up here, correct some things, make government transparent, make government smaller and functional, make us fiscally responsible, but not to the point that we're irresponsible with education, and at the end of the day, quit bickering. And I think we're still bickering, and we really have not created jobs. We're not put more people back to to being employed. I still think our healthcare still has we still have some problems in healthcare. So I think overwhelmingly people are not as excited about what happened. Now, if you're an ideologue and you're far left and you're far right, then okay, you love this climate. But if you're the rest of us who say, look, we really just want government to work and we want to be left alone, go up there, do your job, make sure our taxes are taken care of, make sure our children are taken care of, and then allow us to do the things that we do well, which is work and play and have a great time in North Carolina.
Do you try to diminish the left and the right, the hard left, hard right, or do you just try to bring them in? I'm taking it you're taking a more moderated stance in all this. There's a lot of money, political power, and influence. If you can tuck yourself away on the left or the right, why don't you go there?
Well, it makes for good headlines, and it's great for campaigning, but it's not good for governing.
People love it.
Yeah, but it's not for good governing, and I think that's the problem. I think you can campaign your way and get a lot of money and get a lot of television time, but does it really impact the average North Carolinian? And I think that's what we need. We need people who are willing to govern, and sometimes governing means that you don't get everything you want. You try to get as much as you want, and to me, I've always couched everything in basically 3 steps. One, is it good for the people of North Carolina? Secondly, is it good policy? And finally, is it politics? And if you get the first 2 rights, the third part will take care of itself. If you don't get the first 2 right, the third one doesn't really matter because it doesn't help anyone. And so I think that if we come up here and say, let's do right by North Carolinians, let's work on some very strong policy, I think our state will rally behind that and really applaud it.
Watching your YouTube video at your kitchen table, you note that we're coming out of a huge recession, the biggest one since probably the Great Depression. You say we're emerging from that. How far have we emerged as a state economy? Where do we need to go? Where do we need to be?
Well, I think we're certainly not as far as we need to be. I think there are a lot of people who are still hurting. There are many North Carolinians, even though the federal government says that we're no longer in a recession, there are a whole bunch of places in North Carolina who don't really know that. And so I believe that we move to a place where our unemployment is well below 8%, somewhere around 7% or less. Everyone who wants a job can get a job. And more importantly, though, I also believe that we have to work on our health care. Right now, our health care is going to probably wind up being 25% of our state budget. And that's going to continue to balloon if we don't make some really serious decisions about how we have accessible health care for everyone. And those are decisions that have to be made not based on party lines, but what's based on good policy and what's right for people.
We've talked about how you think, how you feel. This is Eric Mansfield.
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about the business. We've touched on it with this economic recovery, but what are the issues driving the Mansfield campaign? I've seen you say, let's roll up our sleeves, let's fight for the soul of the state. Good sound bites.
Sure.
What's the meat behind this campaign?
The biggest thing behind this campaign is, one, we want to transform how government works. I think one of the bills that I put forth, which didn't really move far, but we looked at trying to make the government transparent so that we're good stewards of the people's money, so that every person knew that when they paid their taxes or when they gave money to the state, that the state was being a very good steward of that. Every single department would have to be able to tell the public, this is what we did with your money and this is why we did it. I also believe that at some point we're going to have to talk about tax reform, that fundamentally the way that we've done it in government is that we have a bunch of programs and then go back to the people and say we don't have enough money, let's increase taxes. And I think that fundamentally doesn't work. I think at some point both sides need to come together and sit down and say, look, we need to tackle tax reform such that our tax structure is finally a present day tax structure as opposed to the antiquated tax structure we have now. And I believe, based on some of the figures that I looked at, that we have enough revenue within that to keep us from doing what we do right now, which is every 2 years, every 4 years, we say, well, we don't have enough money, let's increase taxes. I just don't think the people of North Carolina really are willing to hear that.
Do the average North Carolina family out there, do they trust government to inherently spend tax money and the revenues wisely? Because transparency, I hear candidates say it, but you're right, the bills don't move very far a lot of times, or they move and they're watered down.
Sure. That's
not the cool angle, is we put government on a diet. We cut taxes and we reduce revenue. Why doesn't transparency catch on?
It's not sexy. It doesn't, like you just said, it doesn't sell well. There are no great sound bites about making government transparent because it's very difficult to do. But I believe that there's this trust between me as a legislator and the people that I represent. And I think what has happened over time, that trust has been eroded because we on the legislative side have not always told the truth, or we've nuanced the truth. And I believe that even if people disagree with you, they respect you if you come down and say, this is where I stand, this is what I believe, and then have a really good reason why you do it. And I think that's where our government needs to be, that we need to stand flat-footed, look in the camera, and say, this is what I believe. Now, if you have an opposing view, sure, by all means give your opposing view. But we don't do that. I think now we don't debate really, we just kind of demonize each other so that it becomes a personal attack. And I think that as we move forward, there are some tough issues. But we have some great, intelligent people in North Carolina who can tackle those tough issues. And those issues have to go into an incubator where we are allowed to fuss, we're allowed to argue, but then come out with a great consensus, a product that's actually great for North Carolina.
You dropped a hint about tax reform. I've heard that down at the legislature a time or two as well. I don't know that tax reform would be a major issue at the gubernatorial level where these issues really get vetted.
Sure.
But there is a state sales tax that used to be on the books that
Sure.
is being proposed to be brought back to life to help certain things, certain funds of state government. Your thoughts on a state sales tax?
Well, I believe education is fundamentally the most important thing in North Carolina because one, it levels the playing field. It gives guys like me who grew up exceptionally poor from a single parent home, it gives us an opportunity to be what I am now, a physician, a senator, and all those type of things. And so certainly I think that we need to fully fund education. However, I don't think raising taxes does that. I think if we have some serious debate about tax reform, I don't think we have to do this every year. I think that those, to me, as a physician, is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. Now, the only thing you're going to do is continue to change the Band-Aid until you deal with the problem underneath. And I think tax reform is the way that we deal with that problem. And again, I believe there's enough revenue within the tax reform to make sure that education is fully funded.
Reform taxes for me if you're sitting at a kitchen table and you get 30 seconds to do so.
I believe that everyone who should pay taxes should pay taxes.
Who should pay taxes?
Well, I think that we have to actually expand that. I think we have to broaden that base of the people who pay taxes. I don't think that the one end should bear the brunt of that burden. Certainly, I still believe in tax cuts and tax credit for the middle class. I think the middle class generates a large amount of foundation and infrastructure for our economy. I also believe that we should really be giving tax cuts to our small businesses. I think everyone looks at giving tax cuts to the large businesses, but when you look across our state, the overwhelming majority of the revenue that's created in our state are created by small businesses, and they don't hardly ever get tax cuts. That's why I also filed a bill to make sure that the tax cuts for the large corporation could not be higher than the tax cuts there are for small businesses. I believe those should be level. And so I think that we push small businesses, give them the infrastructure and the foundation that they need, give them tax cuts so that they can continue to create jobs, which they've historically done throughout the history of North Carolina.
How do you see a small business? Define it as you see it.
Well, a small business is very much like mine. You're talking about, to me, these small shops that have 25, 30 people lower. If you look, I don't want to base it on revenue because I believe that that can tilt things. But a guy like me who starts his business 10 years ago with 3 people, and now 10 years later I have 25 people in my office. These are the guys who took a lot of personal sacrifice. These are the guys who didn't pay themselves so they could pay their employees. I believe these are the guys who should be getting to me, the biggest tax break.
Because you will hear that a small business is 500 employees or less.
Right. I'm
not
sure.
buying that one.
No.
Now, with tax reform in place, does the state collect enough tax revenue right now? Do we have a revenue problem? Do we have a spending problem?
I think we have a bit of both. I certainly think that we as a government can go in and look very critically at some things that are duplicated. I certainly think there are some things in our IT sector that in the government that should be expanded and should be placed under one roof, and I think there's some cost savings in there. Certainly I think in the Department of HHS, Health and Human Services, we can tighten that belt in some. And so one, I like what Governor Perdue has already done. She's gone in and kind of whittled away. But I also believe that there are some duplicating services that we can look at. So I think there's on some part there is some revenue. I mean, on some part there's a spending problem. But on the other part, again, I think that we don't create revenue in such a way that it can be a continuous revenue every single year, so we can kind of map things out. I think with the current way that our tax structure is placed, that it's going to allow us to have highs and lows, and I would really like for us to develop some type of tax structure where it's very incremental, that we know that we're going to always stay within a certain percentage, so that we don't have these lows, which in 2007, 2008, where our revenue dropped almost 15% in 1 year. Those are the kind of things we really want to stay away from.
In interviewing other lieutenant gubernatorial candidates, health care is certainly important, but they didn't offer it in the interview. You mentioned health care twice, state health care. What situation is the state in terms of paying for health care?
Well, I mean, when you look at the HHS budget, it's 25% of our overall budget. You look at Medicaid and Medicaid expenditures, and when 2014 comes in with the president's health plan, we're going to add about $1.8 billion more dollars that's going to cost to the state. And so we really need to make some plans right now to address that. I believe CCNC, which is just a fantastic program that we have in the state of North Carolina, which is almost very similar to a Medicaid HMO, which has generated $55 to $60 million worth of healthcare savings in the past, and this year is probably going to be a record on maybe $75 to $80 million. I think that program should be expanded even more so across the state, and so to allow some private businesses to also go into it, because I think it is such a great model for our state. That we can really see some healthcare savings from that. But if we don't control healthcare expenditures in the state, right now it's 25% of every dollar. In the next 4 years, it's going to be 30+% of every dollar. And so it becomes exceptionally hard to rein that in.
Is that expensive or a catastrophe for the state budget?
If it gets up to 35%, it would be catastrophic to the state budget.
You've already spoken on public education, but the charter school cap's been lifted and charter schools are starting to roll out there and get approved. What do you think of charter schools? You say support traditional public education. What is traditional anymore?
Well, I agree with you. I think, to me, from where I stand now, that any educational system, public educational system that allows for any child to get into it and realize the dreams, I'm okay with that. I believe that we should set up a system in our state where every child has access to an excellent education. Now, whether or not they work hard and whether or not they buy into it themselves, that's a part of personal responsibility. Now, I do believe there has to be some personal responsibility. I also believe there has to be some parental responsibility. But I believe that we as a state should always say, no matter what school you go into and whatever county you go into, that when you walk through those doors, you will have the very best access to education possible. I have no problems with charter schools if they're going to do a couple of things. The concept itself, I agree with. I think there's some innovative practices that can be done in charter schools that we can't do in the traditional public schools. However, one of the problems I had with the bill that came through the Senate was that there was no access to public to transportation, and one of my problems is that in my son's school, who goes to public school, I know my son's going to get a great education because of me and my wife. And my wife works exceptionally hard at his school to make sure that he's going to get a great education. However, one of his very, very good friends, his mother is unfortunately in jail. His father, unfortunately, is on drugs, and so he's being raised by his grandmother. His grandmother has type 2 diabetes, who's in a wheelchair, and the grandfather has a bunch of medical problems.
Tough deal.
The only access he gets to school is by a school bus. And so the problem I had with the charter school system that did not have access with public transportation, free transportation for these kids, is that now you've relegated this child to have to go to a certain school, not because he's not talented, not because he's not smart, not because he doesn't will, but only because of his life circumstances. And to me, if you're going to have such great innovative practices in a great innovative place, make it accessible to everybody so everyone gets the opportunity. Again, realizing parental responsibility and personal responsibility are certainly must, but I believe that every child should have the opportunity like me. Grows up in a single parent household, doesn't have a lot of money, but because of education, doors are opened up so that he becomes the doctor or the governor or the president or a newscaster. And so, any school system that can take that child and give them that opportunity, I'm 100% for them.
Let's just say nothing changes in the Senate except Eric Mansfield becomes lieutenant governor. What do Republicans think of you? What do you think they think of you, and do you care what they think of you?
Well, I care because I think we have a fair amount of camaraderie in the Senate. I hope they think I'm fair. I think that's one thing I really work hard on, is trying to read as much as I can and understand the issues from both sides. I think fundamentally there are a lot of things that we agree with. There are always going to be some ideologic things that we disagree with, but I think if you ask most Republicans about me, they say he's fair. That one, he'll listen to our argument. Secondly, he'll make up his own mind, and I'm not afraid to go and talk to him. I'll walk in the door and say, hey, I disagree with you on these points. Can you tell me why you believe what you believe? Now, there are some things that we disagree about passionately, and that will always be true. But again, you can debate your opponent without demonizing your opponent, and I think that's what we should do. That certainly we can debate, and we should debate. And I think our goal is to wrestle with great ideas, not to wrestle with great egos. And so if you wrestle with great ideas, whatever comes out of that, both persons are going to be made better. What I've seen too much inside of our chamber is that we wrestle with a little bit with egos more so than ideals.
Senator Mansfield, thanks for being on the show tonight.
Thank you for having me.
That's Eric Mansfield running for Lieutenant Governor in the Democratic gubernatorial primary in North Carolina. We are interviewing all the major candidates for this office. Hope you will stay tuned and learn about your candidates for Campaign 2012. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.